If you like what you're hearing, put your money where your media is by supporting ad-free independent podcasts like this one. Go to lauraflanders.com/membership, and thank you. Hi, I'm Laura Flanders, and this is The Laura Flanders Show, the TV and radio program that seeks to raise radical spirits by interviewing forward-thinking people with real models of shifting power from the worlds of arts, entrepreneurship, and activism. This week on The Laura Flanders Show, we'll talk with one of the directors of the documentary Whose Streets? As the news cameras left Ferguson, Missouri after the police killing of Michael Brown, Sabaah Folayan and her team stayed on to document what happens to people subjected to police violence as a matter of routine. That's coming up, plus an F word from me on surveillance. If you're not outraged, you're not paying attention, and if you are, well, the feds know about it. It's all coming up on The Laura Flanders Show, the place where the people who say it can't be done take a back seat to the ones who are doing it. 3 years after the killing of Michael Brown by police officer Darren Wilson in Ferguson, Missouri, the documentary Whose Streets takes us back to Ferguson in the days and weeks following that event. Beyond the uprising and the clampdown, the killings and the protest, Whose Streets takes viewers into the personal lives of the activists on the ground. They're young people with young families. The documentary ends up being a lot about love in a community cornered by an increasingly militarized police. Whose Streets is co-directed by Sabaah Folayan and Damon Davis. It's just now being released by Magnolia Pictures, and I am very pleased to welcome Sabaah to the studio. Glad to have you.
Thank you.
Remind us where you were when the news broke of what had happened to Michael Brown.
When I first heard, I was at work, I was on my computer, and I started to see this information come through Twitter. And I saw the photograph of him on the ground, and I saw the tweets of people who were out there.
And you were in New York, right?
Yes, I was here in New York. I was at a nonprofit doing reentry work, so I was helping them to kind of understand how their organization was working with incarcerated people. I heard about it through social media, and it was just really triggering, and then I started to see people taking to the streets, and I started to see the militarization, and it felt like a story that I somehow knew, even though I had never experienced anything like it.
Now, you quote, I think it's Dr. King, a riot is the language of the unheard. In a way, that beginning montage of your film, I couldn't help thinking sort of YouTube is the Hollywood of the unreported. A lot of those images, I don't think most people had seen before, right?
Yeah, I think the media was really focused on the looting, the rioting, what was shiny and would get ratings, and people weren't really paying attention to what was actually happening to this community.
So how long did it take for you to get to Missouri?
I was there about a month after Mike Brown was killed. My job ended. My DP, who was a friend of mine from college, we decided to go down there together and just see how we could kind of support. So we were doing a bit of community service and documenting what we saw. I actually wanted to do a public health study. I was a pre-med student at the time as well. And I wanted to show that people facing off with police was going to have a traumatic effect on this community. You couldn't really do that kind of research in that environment, and I learned that really quickly. So we just started rolling and asking questions.
But you did decide very much to focus on families and the effect on families. I was struck. I mean, maybe I had missed how young everybody was. What ages are the people that you focus on most? Brittany, Farrell, just to name one.
I believe at the time this was happening, she was 26. David is a bit older, about 30, but very, very young people with young families.
And as you got to know them, was there a moment where you had to decide, like, where do I put the personal in this political story? Where do I put the activist in this police story? How you do the balance?
Yeah, that was tough. So we started out about a year ago, actually in August. We had a 90-minute cut of the film, and there was none of the protests, none of the news footage. It was only people and their families. And there were 7 different people that we had followed in depth, and so each of them kind of had a moment in the film. And it was just about teasing out the cause and effect relationships between what was going on in the streets and what was happening inside of people's homes.
So that must have been torturous, getting rid of 5 people's stories.
Yeah, it was really tough. And we never wanted to tell this as a kind of messiah story. That's not about one hero that comes and galvanizes everyone. It really was always meant to be about a community of ordinary people coming together.
Then we'll get back to more of the community part and the love stories, which I really came across really strongly. But you also do a lot of reporting. I mean, there are facts in the story that come out in your film that I don't think are widely known. One, at the very beginning, your character David, who's involved in Cop Watch, points out that there were cameras on the street, on the scene where the killing happened, where Darren Wilson killed Michael Brown. Have we ever seen that footage?
I have not been able to get access to that footage, but actually a good friend of mine, Lyric Cabral, who made a wonderful documentary called Terror, is working on another film about the community and what actually happened more on that day.
And he also makes a point, David makes the point in the film, that the police policy after the announcement of the non-indictment went down was very suspicious as well. Tell us about that.
The night of the non-indictment, it was very, very eerie. There was this build-up in the weeks and days leading up to it where you could just feel in the air that it was coming down any day, and everyone would just be asking each other, what do you think it's going to be? What's going to happen? When is it going to happen? And so the can just kept getting kicked down the road, and finally, in the middle of the night, this announcement drops, and this unified command, no one knew kind of where they came from. And people were whispering about, there being this sort of all call put out to police across Missouri to just come and be a part of this force. And so that night, they're just these men in black, and you don't really see any name tags or shields, and there's no one you can talk to or ask any questions of or anything. Like, people sort of just came ready for battle, and no one ever really did get an answer to the question of kind of where does the buck stop.
And yet all the looting was kind of allowed to happen.
Yeah, at the same time, and it's sort of this thing where as soon as the police sort of arrive on the scene, people get agitated. What would have been a rally and people just sort of gathering becomes a confrontation when the police arrive, or they'll be there and then they'll escalate. What I saw was police sort of escalating and then pulling back. And once that energy is ignited, people are frustrated, people are upset. There's this sort of group catharsis that happens out there that I think is beyond anyone's control. It's sort of bigger than any strategic conversation about protest tactics. I think it's something that happens when you have people in a powder keg like that. And particularly on the black and poorer sides of town is where you saw police kind of pull back and let that energy just get released.
I mean, heck, we've seen that mob mentality in football stadiums and at sports games, so
right.
We all know how that works. But it was striking what people said, and it was striking the degree to which those activists on the ground were conscious and aware of exactly what was happening, even as it was happening, and they couldn't really stop it. What was the thing you were most surprised by as you started trying to cover the story or covering it from the inside out? Clearly you know something about the issues, you're working on re-entry after incarceration, post-med, pre-med, but still, I bet you were shocked by some things that had been represented differently.
I don't think I knew the extent of the systemic issues in St. Louis, and, really learning from St. Louis taught me a lot about what's going right and wrong around the country, but particularly in that city and particularly in the parts of town that are occupied by black people, because they have a long history of very intense segregation. The housing is falling apart, the education is falling apart. The city is divided into 91 municipalities. So Ferguson is 6 miles wide, and there are 91 of these. Just the sheer bureaucracy that people are facing in order to try to make change. That's 91 different police departments that would have to change to effectively change the quality of life for people in this region. I think I just didn't understand how deep these tendrils go and how sort of intertwined people's daily life and our sort of status quo is with these seemingly isolated cases of police brutality.
This is the Laura Flanders Show. I'm Laura. This week we're talking about filmmaking and news breaking with Sabaah Folayan, co-director with Damon Davis of Whose Streets, a documentary that follows the intimate lives of activists in Ferguson, Missouri, after the police killing of unarmed African-American teenager Michael Brown. Police bullets, like the sort that took Mike Brown's life, are easy to hear and see. Movies are full of them. But what about the systems of oppression, legal, educational, economic, cultural, that also determine people like Brown's life chances and lives? How to capture those on film?
We shall be changed in the twinkling of an eye. We shall be changed, shall be changed, shall be changed in the twinkling of an eye.
Momentum Part 2 by Samora Pinderhughes from his album The Transformation Suite. He's also the composer for the documentary Whose Streets, the film we're talking about. Do your part for the transformation, why don't you? Go to lauraflanders.com, become a sustaining supporter of this program, and keep this content coming. Think about it, a weekly delivery of grit and vision for as little as $2 a month. Thanks. My guest filmmaker and activist Sabaah Folayan, co-director of Whose Streets, didn't start out as a filmmaker. She was a social justice activist working on criminal justice issues. In money media, she quickly realized, violence spikes ratings, often at the expense of black lives. Could you make films in a different way, I asked. Here's her answer.
We talk a lot on this program about alternative models of things, like how could we do things differently? If we don't like the way things are happening now, how could we do them in a different kind of way? Speaking as a filmmaker now, what have you learned about how we can tell these systemic stories? Because it's easy to capture violence in the streets, and once that picture's out there, it becomes the story, which is maybe why they let all that looting happen. It's hard to tell these systemic, long arc of history narratives. Tell us a bit about your approach. We'll show some clips, and then what's your lesson maybe for other reporters, journalists, particularly people that maybe don't have a year to make a doc?
I think to answer the second part of your question first, I think as far as format, all of these different types of media are necessary, and it was necessary for someone to respond immediately.
Right.
It was necessary for people to have that information. I may have wished they had a different lens on it, but I don't think that documentary will ever replace the news or vice versa. So I just recommend, and in both situations, I recommend that people take a holistic approach in general to life, to problem solving, not looking at what's happening in politics as this is politics and this is separate from what's happening in education and separate from what goes inside my home, but really looking at these things as interconnected, I think can allow us to talk about issues that may seem dry, like fines and ticketing. Sometimes it feels like what happens in our daily life is totally disconnected from these ideas, and there's a compartment for our social justice. But social justice shouldn't be something that you do when you go on Facebook. It should be something that is embedded in your lived experience. So I think looking at things holistically rather than siloed is a way kind of into a more realistic and tangible approach.
Remind people of what the fines and ticketing story was as it pertained to St. Louis?
So a big reason why this movement spread in St. Louis was because of this long practice of police targeting people with fines and tickets. Everyone we spoke to when we first got there would talk about how you can't drive from the city to the county without getting stopped. Every single person was completely paranoid of getting stopped. And so I think when the police came out and responded this way to Michael Brown, and he was supposedly stopped for walking in the middle of the street, this tiny infraction, everybody had an experience. Mm-hmm. I've been harassed for some tiny infraction. And so it was a big part of what galvanized this group of people to come out. But
and it was the way the police department was making money, the way the city was, the
right.
town was making money, right? On these escalating fines as people were unable to pay the first one, and it just got bigger.
Mm-hmm. And the same went for housing fines, people for not mowing their lawns, for having their trash cans in the wrong place. So you're taking people who are already poor, taking what little money they may have, and also incarcerating people when they can't pay these fines. So this is very unconstitutional, and the DOJ report came out and showed that this was happening in Ferguson and other municipalities in St. Louis. But I think without having this kind of flashpoint and seeing viscerally how this can affect a family, you don't understand why small-time tickets are a really important issue.
Yeah. So going back to the families, there's a beautiful moment where two of the characters that you follow get married. Two women have a wedding, and they come out chanting revolutionary love, 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 and you feel like this isn't at the end of the movie. It's not even in the middle. It's quite near the beginning of the movie. You're making a point. Can you talk about that?
That's one of my favorite scenes, and I'm really happy that we got to show that. And we had questions about it. Does it belong in this film? Does it feel out of place? But it's a bleak proposition a little bit to go out and face off with your own government with nothing but your hands and a sign. And we wanted to show where people were getting this courage from, where people were finding this strength and this power to try to even believe they could do this. And love was such a huge part of it. And people connecting with one another in ways that they had been taught that they couldn't or shouldn't, and coming together. And we felt like this relationship was sort of the crystallization of that idea.
She said, if you're not questioning normal, you're not normal, or something.
You're not paying attention.
You're not paying attention. Let's show a clip from the film. The clip that we're going to show actually features those two women standing down the police outside the police department. Do you want to say anything more about it?
Yeah, so this was actually a really incredible night because it was like a little mini victory for the movement. It was the first night where the police sort of allowed people to occupy the street. They had been out on the sidewalk and doing this kind of back and forth with police for about 52 days at this point. So this was the 52nd day of protest, and the police finally let them just occupy the streets. And
here's a clip from Whose Streets?
Treat us like humans
Don't look
and
down.
not like animals. Don't beat us like dogs when you do arrest us.
I ain't letting none of y'all.
Fast forward to the end.
We will continue to fight for our rights. We will continue to fight for our rights.
You see Brittany get arrested for something. I won't tell the whole story of the entire film. People can check it out. But she comes out changed, you feel. Talk about her. What happened to her? What in the course of this film? And do you know what happened to her while she was detained by the police?
Well, fortunately, she wasn't detained for very long. I think she may have stayed overnight. But I think in that moment, she made a choice when she went out there that she was going to see that action through. But I think when those consequences actually came, it put things in perspective, and she had so much on the line, and she consciously and willingly put it on the line, but it doesn't make it any easier when you have to face those consequences. And I just have so much admiration for her and the way that she's still, even in that moment, she's still looking out for the people around her and making sure people are okay. And I actually got arrested in that same action. And I remember she called me the next day and she's checking on me. How are you doing? How are you feeling? Are you okay? And she's facing a felony at this point. It was really a point for her character where her sense of self-preservation and her care for her community, I think, were really, really at odds. And it was hard after that. It was hard dealing with this case, and it was very political. They very much wanted to make an example of her, and luckily she ended up being acquitted, and she doesn't have to, do any time or anything like that. But
And she's bringing her daughter into the movement too, and she talks about that as well. Here's another clip. Whose Streets?
She was 6 when the movement first started. Day one, she was with me. There were a lot of questions about why we were out there, and it was my opportunity to educate her on how things have never been right for Black folks in America, and this is just another example of that, and this is what we have to do. I dropped out of school for a whole semester, set my graduation date back 6 months. So many opportunities were lined up. My professional network was large. Soon as something happens and I feel like my community is at war, I'm like, to hell with all of that. None of that matters for me anymore. I want her to think for herself, to resist and participate in democracy. That is your right, and that cannot be taken away from you.
I'm Laura, and this is the Laura Flanders Show. You can watch excerpts of Whose Streets, the film we're featuring on this program, at lauraflanders.com, where you can also explore our full archive and subscribe to this podcast. Like what you're hearing? Put your money where your media is by supporting ad-free, independent programming like this one. Go to lauraflanders.com/membership, and thanks. More to come with filmmaker Sabaah Folayan, one of the directors of the documentary Whose Streets, right after this.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me. Oh, swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home.
That was Ascension by Samora Pinderhughes, featuring a poem by Jeremy Harris from Samora's album The Transformations Suite. He's also the composer for the documentary Whose Streets, the film we're talking about on this podcast. Coming up, Big Brother wants to collect yet more of your data, but he's saying it's just the immigrants he's after. My commentary, the F word, is coming. But first, Sabaah Folayan, co-director with Damon Davis of the documentary Whose Streets, shared some thoughts about the future of the movement that the activists of Ferguson helped to birth. What's next for them? And how will or do they distinguish themselves from their parents and their grandparents' civil rights movement?
So the young people that these activists are raising, they describe as their future. They also talk about a new movement, a movement that isn't, I think as Tefpo, the rapper puts it, not your daddy's civil rights movement. How does that look to you now? If you were making a sequel, what story would it track?
I think we're learning. I think that quote, it's not your daddy's civil rights movement, I think it's many layered. I think it speaks to the fact that the torch has sort of been passed by a lot of those older leaders who have taught us what they know. I think it also speaks to the fact that the stakes are a little bit different from us. I think our predecessors proved that Black people could be dignified and sophisticated and, that we were respectable. And then we learned that that still wasn't enough for us to be guaranteed the human rights that we want. And so we are kind of facing a more human rights struggle and a struggle for recognition on a more philosophical level in a way. And I think part of that looks like defining for ourselves what is our generation's purpose, what are our legacies going to be. A lot of people that I know are dealing with anxiety and dealing with self-care. And I think millennials get this reputation for being kind of spoiled and soft and self-centered, but in reality, there's kind of a built-in trauma, built-in PTSD to being a Black person, to being an oppressed person in a lot of ways. That harm and that toxicity is where a lot of these abuse, a lot of abuse comes from, a lot of the negative things that we're facing that can justify the systemic injustices against us or just cripple our movements in general, make it difficult for us to work together. A lot of those things start with not taking care of ourselves. I think it's great that we've identified that. I don't know what the next chapter is, but I think that it's a start for us to be really interrogating ourselves and figuring out how to be okay.
Have you learned, has Ferguson taught lessons about how we actually keep communities safe?
Well, I think that it also harks back to that scene where Brittany is arrested, but I think there's an interesting conversation happening about what does it look like for white people to be involved in anti-racist struggle. And someone asked me the other day, what does white allyship look like? And I said, I don't really believe in allyship, because if it's true that we're one people and, just before this was all happening, it was I don't see color, then when that kid gets shot on the street, then you should be able to imagine that that's your son or your brother. There shouldn't be my fight and your fight. And so I think that...
I'm not in solidarity with you, I'm with you.
Right. We're all in this. And so I think that, and I've started to see around the country different groups of white organizers recognizing that. But I think that if we're going to pull back from really severe conflict, the police have shown that when it's Black bodies and Black issues, they are willing to escalate immediately. And I don't know that that's the same case if white people were to come out en masse. So we really need for people to participate. And I think some of the measures that we can take are simple as far as general strikes, as far as coming out into the streets, but it's about, can we get on the same page, and can people who don't see themselves as having a stake in this recognize that we actually all have a stake in this.
Have you been cheered by the responses to the Charlottesville right uprising?
Absolutely, I have. I think that a lot of people have come off the sidelines because of that. A lot of white people have taken responsibility to say that we need to go back to our communities. And I've seen a lot of people actually stepping down in situations where they don't feel like their institutions are upholding the right values. And I think that's really, really huge.
Sabaah Folayan, thank you so much. Congratulations on the film,
Thank
Whose
you so
Streets.
much.
Check it out, people. You can find more information about the film and all our coverage of Ferguson at our website. Next up, my weekly commentary, The F Word. To target activists in the 1970s, U.S. intelligence agencies conducted so much illegal surveillance that they generated one of the biggest scandals in U.S. history. The abuses of the 70s led to the Watergate hearings, the Church Committee, and the creation of a permanent Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. 40 years on, a lot of people are watching documentaries about the Vietnam War while our government conducts surveillance ops that put anything from that era to shame. The only thing Americans seem to be doing less now than then is protest. So why is that? Not long ago, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security quietly announced that it will be collecting more data on more people. Starting October 18th, alongside everything else they already track, the DHS will be gathering social media information, Twitter handles, Facebook accounts, Instagram pictures, search records, viewing history, calling history, you name it. DHS and its immigration unit ICE will be targeting immigrants, they say. But they actually include everyone not born a citizen and anyone who interacts with those people. So that scoops up me and I bet you. Certainly everyone in the Trump administration who communicates with the First Lady. In the 1970s, the FBI and CIA said their targets were domestic terrorists and foreign radicals. What people discovered all too late is that they were actually going after civil rights leaders, feminists, journalists, not just Jane Fonda and Art Buchwald and Dr. Martin Luther King or Muhammad Ali, but everybody who interacted with those people. Back then, Democrats in Congress held hearings, gathered evidence, concluded that a long, shocking list of privacy rights had been violated. Among those, the right to assemble, the right to speak, the right to associate, the right to communicate, and they took action. As in the internet age we do all these things online, we should at least be hearing a bit of hue and cry, especially from those who claim to abhor big government. In the 70s, enough people got angry, even in Congress, that they demanded tighter controls on intelligence gathering and more oversight. Today we're hearing murmurs, mostly about the privacy rights of so-called legal immigrants and citizens. We should know better. If our predecessors had realized more clearly sooner that spying wasn't only someone else's problem, but actually theirs, we might not be here today. Surveillance isn't a problem only for them, but not us. In a free society, it's a problem for democracy. The Laura Flanders Show recently completed a series on digital security. Find out what you can do to secure your phone and your social networks now at lauraflanders.com. You can watch this program and all our archives at lauraflanders.com. And if you haven't reviewed us yet, please do on iTunes or wherever it is you get your podcasts. Help spread the word. This show is produced by yours truly with Monica Mohapatra, Natasha Elena Ullman, Jeannie Hopper, Danica D'Souza, Emily Allen, Charlotte Prager, and Diego Romero Montiel. I'd like to hear what you think, so write to me. That's Laura, L-A-U-R-A, at lauraflanders.com. I do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. The program's made possible by the Novo Foundation and listeners like you. Become a member today. Thanks for your ongoing support. We couldn't do it without you. Stay kind. Stay curious. Till the next time, I'm Laura Flanders.